Today on Tea or Coffee, our guest is in the studio and he is Adekunle Olubumi Akinola. He is a psychiatric nurse and also a mental health expert. Good morning and you're welcome.
Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Yes. Okay, so
Nice
let's...
to have you here.
Yes, same here. And let's start by explaining what exactly mental health is.
I would start by defining mental health according to the World Health Organization, WHO. And in that definition, 4 parameters were outlined. First, ability for one to identify their own potentials. 2, ability to cope with the stresses of life. 3, ability to work productively and fruitfully. And 4, ability to contribute meaningfully into the society we are living with. Now, there are a lot of people who can do this. And by estimates, we say 90% of people are not mentally healthy. But it doesn't mean they are mentally ill.
Okay.
So you find a lot of people walking on the street, living normal lives, but they are not mentally healthy. And not necessarily that they have a form of mental disorder or a form of mental illness. Take, for instance, a young boy, a graduate, who has no riches left for him by his parents and thinks he can leave school and the next 6 months buy a Lamborghini, for instance. No meaningful employment, no source of income. You find out that that person is unable to correctly estimate what his or her potentials are, especially considering the economic downturn in the country. Then the second parameter, ability to cope with the stress of life. And when we talk about stresses of life, there are levels of stresses we face. There is what we call maturational crisis,
Okay.
and then situational crisis. A baby who is born today, at some point, needs to start walking. All along, he's been used to sleeping on the couch, everything being done for him. Now, there's a point he needs to get walking or start crawling. That's a crisis, because a crisis is defined as a state where your normal coping mechanisms are not sufficient for what is needed for you. Now, at that point, it's a crisis, at the same time, a normal physiological part of life. When we talk about situational crisis now, maybe, for instance, somebody lost a loved one, or you lose your job, and those ones are not part of the normal day-to-day activities.
Okay.
It happens, it's sudden. That's situational. Now, when somebody becomes unable to manage all of this, to cope with these stressors, whether maturational or situational, there's a problem. The person is not totally mentally healthy.
How possible is it that you can never be completely mentally healthy?
What I meant is that you can never say I have gotten to the optimal level.
Okay.
You can never say I'm 100% mental, because even if you are most comfortable at this point in time, there's still a crisis you still have to face.
Okay.
And you have to deploy your coping mechanisms to tackle. So you can't say I've reached the peak.
Okay.
I'm now totally mentally healthy. That was what I meant.
Okay, so you said that, most people are not mentally healthy and yet are not necessarily mentally ill. So at what point is that deficit considered a mental disorder? Where does the mental illness begin from?
Well, the point where we delineate mental illness from the normal stressors of life is when you are not able to cope with all of these things, it now starts affecting your work, your education, your relationship with people, and even something as little as taking care of yourself, grooming yourself. Don't forget, what is normal for you might not be normal for me. And that's why we say mental health is relative. Relative to where you live, relative to your background. For instance, I'll give an example. The guy on the street of New York might be rushing to office and has a cup of coffee on his hand and burger. Is eating
on the road.
On the road, going to perfectly normal. But when you walk on the streets of Oshodi or Ibadan and you hold the kwa and akara and you are eating on the road, what happens?
Something is wrong. Okay, so now how important is it for you to regularly check your mental health to be sure that at every point in time you're okay?
Although most of these checks can be done with normal day-to-day interactions with people.
Okay.
But the problem we have is this stigmatization. But mental health is something you should check at least once in a year or twice in a year. There's this concept in mental health, I will call it the Joas's window. And it's like a window divided into 4 squares. and that's talking about the types of problems people have. The first square is talking about those that are known to self and known to others.
Okay.
You know there's a challenge, others too know there's a challenge. The next one is talking about those that are known to self, unknown to others. You know you have a problem, others don't know. There's a third one, those that are known to others, unknown to self. And that is where most of the big challenges in mental health comes in. Because the person who is mentally ill most times does not recognize anything is wrong. He feels he's living a perfectly normal life. But it is others who will know that, no, something's wrong with this person. And at that point, it behoves on the community to help the person seek professional help. And the last one, which is the most deadly, is those that are unknown to self and unknown to others. You don't know, others don't know. The challenge is, how do you get help for that?
Are there other levels and extents to which mental health can manifest?
Well, it depends on what perspective you are looking at it from. On the core professional perspective, we have diagnostic criteria, diagnostic tools. Like we have the ICD, that is the International Classification of Deaths and Diseases. And we have the DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Illnesses. But on a general level, we have what we call the psychosis. And that is the core mental illness. That is when the person, psychosis simply means that the person has lost touch with reality.
Okay.
Totally lost touch with reality. And then that is the highest level. There are so many diagnoses that fall under the psychosis. And then we have the neuroses. The neuroses are described as just mild infractions.
Okay, I know that there are different classifications as to mental illness when you're beginning to have issues with your mental health.
Sure.
So what are those classifications? So people do not mix it up and then assume that mental health is only when you lose your mind and you're walking on the street.
Well, I think we should get it clear this way.
Okay.
That mental health is not the opposite of mental illness.
Mental illness.
So it's possible, in fact, in that WHO definition, it says that mental health is not just the absence of mental illness. That is the fact that you've gone to a psychiatrist and you have certified that you don't have a mental illness does not mean you are totally mentally
healthy.
Now, when you come in and you are seen and we determine, oh, there's a problem somewhere, that's when we now come to the levels of diagnosis. And for instance, under the psychosis, we have the depression, we have the mood disorders, we have bipolar affective disorder, and so on and so forth. Now, for each of them, there are very, very technical diagnostic criteria. So certain criteria, like for depression now, the person must have been seen to be withdrawn to self, maybe lost interest in activities that were previously enjoyable. And it's not enough for you to say, oh, this person has all of these things. Yes, you establish a diagnosis. When you have all of those things, at least in some cases, depending on the criteria, might have either 2 or 3 of the symptoms, and which must have been consistent for a number of times. In some cases 1 week, some cases 2 weeks, before we can now say, yes, a diagnosis is established.
So how far do we have to go when it comes to stigmatization?
We still have a very long way to go, especially in this country.
Okay.
And the first I will talk about is when you look at our Constitution, it says before you can hold any political office, you must not have a history of mental illness.
Mental health.
We need to understand that mental illness is just like other diseases like malaria, diabetes, and so on and so forth. So it's like saying before you can hold a public office, you must not have had a previous history of malaria. So if you can't apply that to malaria or to typhoid, why should we apply it to mental illness? It's fine to say at that point when you want to hold office, you must be certified fit. But because I've had a past history and you, because of that, deny me of enjoying
Can I quickly come in there? You talked about stages to mental illness. You talked about neurosis. You talked about other stages and psychosis where you completely lose it. Now, if you've had a history with maybe neurosis or a level that has not been up to the point where you totally lose it, but, there's a tendency for you to manifest again, is it safe for you to hold a political office?
Now, when I talked about stages earlier on, it doesn't mean that somebody who has neurosis necessarily have to graduate to psychosis. The classification is based on the types, not stages, as in you have to move from one level to another. Now, when you've had, for instance, somebody who has had an issue with substance abuse, and he has gone through rehab and has been cleared, there's nothing wrong for the person to exercise. Don't forget, these things are human rights. There's nothing wrong to say, for instance, because I had malaria in the past, then it's like I'm asking you, is it safe for me to hold the public office because I had malaria in the past and I can have again? The most important thing is that at that point when I'm holding that office, am I fit to hold office? That is the most important thing we should consider. And if we now have it at that level of the government that should be most supportive, you can now imagine what we have. You get people who lose their jobs because they had a mental illness. It's like sacking somebody because he had typhoid or because he has malaria, which I think it's not fair. And because of that level of stigmatization, our governments and our agencies responsible for mental health don't commit enough to the funding.
That's interesting. Can we outline some of the often and major causes of mental health illness in particular?
Some genes have been noted that when you have these genes or when a parent has a certain illness, there is a high possibility of transferring it
to the child.
Now, the fact that the person has that gene does not necessarily mean that he or she will manifest that mental illness. He or she might need a precipitating factor. For instance, somebody who has the gene of suffering from depression, the gene is there staying somewhere. Maybe later in life, he or she now encounters a disastrous problem. That becomes the precipitating factor. Social support, or let me put it, stress. I talked about mental health as the ability to cope with stressors of life. Now, there are some times that the stress becomes so overwhelming, and then your normal defense mechanisms fail you and you can't cope. And another thing is substance abuse. There are some substances that when you use them, we call them psychoactive substances, and by that we mean substances that have the power of altering the mind.
Okay.
Now, the individual's mind is such that whatever a man wants to become in life are learned. And once a child attains the age of 5 or thereabout, you have learned everything you need in life. That is, the person can't be changed. But we now have substances that have the power of changing what has been fixed. And don't forget that at that point, once you attain the age, you have learned everything. You can't learn again, you can't. But these substances come to change everything you have learned. You begin to unlearn them, and it becomes difficult to go back to relearn, to go back to the... So that is why substances are so dangerous, that once they alter the mind, it becomes addictive, and it's difficult for the person to stop
it. Okay, so what are the treatments that are available for mental illness?
Well, depending on the level of the mental illness, there are various levels of treatments. For some, something as little as social support will be enough. Somebody who is facing stress, something as little as a pat on the back from the employer or from family, it's enough for what they need. For some, you might need to come in for counseling sessions, which will be enough. For some, you might need to come in for outpatient treatments. When you come, you are evaluated and you get some medications. And for some, you might need to be admitted. There's a difference between treatments and prevention.
So can you give us ways to, achieve mental health, good mental health?
Well, ways to achieve good mental health. One, avoid stress. Don't stress yourself, and don't attempt to do beyond what your capacity can take you to do. Then two, be healthy in terms of physical health, because there are some physical illnesses that complicate into mental illnesses. Once you strive to maintain your physical health, then you can be sure you're on a good path to ensure mental health. Get social support from people. Something as little as when you have a task ahead, you get encouragement. Can limit your stress in a whole lot of ways that it helps you to cope, other than somebody who is getting more discouragement or who is getting being pressured in a lot of ways. Then exercise. Learn to know things that work for you.
Okay.
Learn to know. There's this concept of 5-minute madness. When something gets bottled up within you, once you just learn what works for you in terms of letting out the pressure, ease out the pressures. And once you do that, and then, of course, avoid substances. And when there are challenges, know who to talk to, get advice from.
Exactly.
And when you do all of that,
okay, thank you so much.
Hello there. Did you just enjoy that beautiful video? Don't worry, we have more for you. All you have to do is click on the subscribe button and ring that little bell for more notifications. Tea or coffee will be served for you.